So imagine, just for a second, that you are stepping into like a modern state-of-the-art engineering lab.
Oh, yeah, the absolute dream setup.
Right, exactly. The environment is pristine. You have unlimited high-speed internet, incredibly precise 3D printers just humming in the corner.
Millions of dollars in venture capital.
Yes, venture capital backing your project and a dedicated team of postdocs ready to help you debug your code.
It is the ideal frictionless ecosystem, designed entirely to help you create something that changes the world.
Right, but what if you strip away all of those resources? Like, take away the funding, the 3D printers, your access to formal education.
Even your basic legal rights.
Exactly. Drop yourself into a society that systemically insists you are incapable of complex thought. I mean, could you still invent a technology that the entire modern world relies on?
Well, according to Antonio Arnold's book, Trailblazers of Innovation, not only is the answer yes, but the people who survived that exact impossible scenario literally built the foundations of our modern era.
Which is why we are here. Welcome to our deep dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in the unseen contributions of African American inventors.
And we are not approaching this as just some passive history lesson. The context of these innovations is staggering.
Yeah, it really is.
These were individuals navigating, the trauma of slavery, the oppressive laws of the Jim Crow era, and a near-total exclusion from scientific institutions. Yet they actively engineered solutions to incredibly complex problems.
Which is exactly why we're doing this. If you are listening right now, whether you're like a STEM student staring down a brutal academic setback, an aspiring engineer trying to secure funding, or just a startup founder trying to find your footing, these historical journeys are your blueprint.
Absolutely.
They prove that the most restrictive barriers often force the most revolutionary design thinking. And what is brilliant about Antonio Arnold's research is that it shows us these world-changing ideas, they didn't start in massive industrial complexes.
Oh, not at all.
The first spark of genius usually happened right in the living room, born out of pure frustration with a daily chore.
Yeah, that transition from domestic frustration to engineering breakthrough is where we really see the roots of modern user-centered design.
Okay, let's unpack this because it's such a modern concept, right?
It is. Take Sarah Boone in the late 19th century. If you look at the fashion of the 1890s, women's clothing involved incredibly tight, complex sleeves and corseted bodices.
Yeah, lots of structure.
Right. So ironing these garments on a standard, flat, wooden board was just a nightmare.
Because it's flat and the clothes are, well, no.
Exactly. You were constantly pressing new creases into the fabric you had literally just ironed. It was a tedious, highly inefficient process.
Hold on, I want to look closer at what Boone actually did here because she didn't just pad a board, she looked at a fundamental geometry problem.
Yes.
In 1892, she engineered and patented an ironing board that was narrow, significantly curved to mimic the exact shape of a sleeve, and crucially, it was reversible.
What's fascinating here is she intimately understood the physical mechanics of the chore, because she was the user experiencing the friction.
Right. She essentially practiced user-centered design way before it was a tech industry buzzword. She manipulated the geometry of the tool to fit the 3D topology of the garment.
She essentially turned a frustrating household task into an exercise in spatial engineering. And, that ability to identify a hyper-specific user pain point and engineer a solution, that's the core of any successful modern startup.
It really is.
And you see an even more expansive version of this trajectory with Madam C.J. Walker.
Oh, Walker's story is the ultimate entrepreneurial masterclass. I mean, she started out doing grueling physical labor as a laundress, exposing herself to harsh chemicals like lye.
Which were very common in soaps back then.
Yeah, just brutal on the skin.
Yeah.
And she eventually suffered from a severe scalp ailment that caused her to lose her hair.
Right, because standard hair care products at the time simply were not formulated for African American hair textures.
Or the specific dermatological conditions caused by that kind of labor.
So rather than accept a market that ignored her, she utilized chemistry. She experimented and formulated her own healing ointment and hair care system.
Which is incredible on its own.
It is, but the true genius of Madam C.J. Walker was that she understood an invention is useless without a distribution network.
Wait, this is why I have to ask about the logistics.
Right.
Because bypassing gatekeepers sounds great in theory, but how does a Black woman in the early 20th century secure the chemical supply chains and the capital to build an entire factory without industry backing.
By fundamentally redefining the business model. She didn't rely on traditional retail channels.
Because they wouldn't take her products.
Exactly. Those channels wouldn't stock her products. So instead, she built a massive direct-to-consumer network.
Wow.
Yeah. She leveraged her deep cultural insight to hire and train thousands of women as sales agents, which she called hair culturists.
I love that term.
It's brilliant. She even established Lelia College to formalize their training. She didn't just invent a product. She invented an entire microeconomy that empowered her community.
Proving that understanding your audience's socioeconomic needs is just as critical as the chemical formula of your product.
Precisely. Bypassing traditional gatekeepers by leveraging cultural insights shows modern students that understanding your audience is everything.
And that is a profound lesson for anyone trying to launch a product today. If the existing infrastructure won't support your innovation, you might just have to engineer the infrastructure yourself.
Yeah, you build your own door.
Exactly. And we see that same principle applied to the physical infrastructure of the home, too. Like Alice Parker, she didn't just want to make a room warmer.
No, she wanted to change how heat moved through a building.
Right. In 1919, she patented a gas heating furnace that utilized the principles of thermodynamics.
Parker's design was revolutionary because it relied on convection. Instead of needing a dangerous, highly inefficient coal or wood fire in every single room,
Which was the standard.
yeah. Her system drew in cold air, heated it in a central combustion chamber using natural gas, and then used a system of ducts to naturally circulate that warm air throughout the entire house.
She effectively laid the groundwork for modern central heating by understanding fluid dynamics.
She really did. So we have these innovators completely redefining the efficiency and comfort of the home. But, as the country's industrial age exploded, the focus had to shift.
Because fixing the home was one thing.
Right, but if you stepped outside, the rapidly expanding infrastructure of the United States, specifically the transportation grid, was highly inefficient and incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, the mechanical limitations of early transit systems were massive bottlenecks for the entire economy. So let's look at Elijah McCoy.
Yes, McCoy was a highly trained mechanical engineer, educated in Scotland. He had the formal credentials, the deep understanding of applied physics.
But when he returned to the United States, systemic racism dictated that no firm would hire a black man as an engineer.
Right. The highest position he could secure was as a trained fireman and oiler.
Which meant his daily reality was standing in a sweltering locomotive, shoveling coal, and manually lubricating the moving parts of a massive steam engine.
And that manual lubrication was a severe flaw in the transit system. Trains at that time had to physically stop every few miles.
Every few miles.
Literally. An oiler would have to get out and manually grease the axles and bearings. If they didn't, the sheer friction of metal on metal would cause the engine parts to overheat, seize up, and potentially derail the train.
Which cost the shipping industry untold amounts of time and money.
Massive amounts. But McCoy applies his mechanical engineering background to this massive physical problem. He knows that the train is generating immense steam pressure.
So, in 1872, he invents a specialized lubricator cup. He engineered a valve that used the locomotive's own steam pressure to continuously pump oil into the moving parts while the train was at full speed.
He essentially created an automated, self-regulating mechanical system.
It was so effective, and the engineering was so flawless that railroad buyers became incredibly specific.
Yeah, they refused cheap, faulty knockoffs. When purchasing parts, they demanded the real McCoy.
A phrase that cemented his legacy in the English language. I just think that's an incredible application of physics.
It really is. But it wasn't just about making trains faster. Sometimes it was about making them survivable.
Right. Safety.
When you look at Andrew Jackson Beard in the late 1800s, the focus really shifts to preserving human life.
The rail yards of the 19th century were horrifying environments.
Absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
To connect two train cars, a rail worker had to stand directly between the massive moving cars.
Which is terrifying to even think about.
Right, and as they bumped together, the worker had to drop a heavy iron pin into a link at the exact fraction of a second the cars met.
And a timing error of like half a second meant a worker could be crushed or lose an arm or a leg, and this was just accepted as a standard occupational hazard.
But Beard completely rejected that status quo. He understood kinetic energy and mechanical leverage.
So in 1897, he patented the Jenny coupler.
Exactly. He designed a mechanism with interlocking horizontal jaws. When the two train cars bumped into each other, the kinetic force of the impact caused the jaws to automatically engage and lock.
So no human being ever needed to stand between the cars again.
Never again. It revolutionized global railway safety.
It is an absolute triumph of mechanical engineering. But I do have to challenge the narrative here for a second.
Okay.
Because we hear these massive success stories. Morgan selling his traffic light to GE for $40K, Beard making $50K on his coupler. But did the patent system actually protect them equally, or was it an uphill battle? I mean, we are talking about these monumental patents. But a patent is only as good as your ability to defend it in court.
That is a crucial question, especially for modern creators navigating the complexities of intellectual property. The historical reality of the patent system was incredibly fraught.
I can imagine.
Prior to the Civil War, enslaved individuals were barred from holding patents entirely because they were not considered citizens. Any mechanical genius they demonstrated legally belonged to their enslavers.
That's just devastating.
It is. And even for free African Americans, the hurdles were immense. Henry Blair, who patented agricultural tools in the 1830s, had his racial identity specifically designated as a colored man, recorded right on his official patent documents.
So the government was actively flagging their identity within the intellectual property system.
Exactly. And to your point, defending a patent requires immense legal capital, which many of these inventors did not have.
Right.
However, following the Civil War, the Patent Office evolved into one of the very few federal entities that was, at least on paper, objective. If your schematic was mechanically sound and mathematically accurate, the Patent Office provided a rare, legally irrefutable pathway to establish ownership of an idea.
It was a brutal uphill battle. But securing that patent was a vital first step in proving intellectual legitimacy in a society that denied their humanity.
Yes, it contrasts so sharply with modern digital invention paths.
It really puts it into perspective. When you contrast that historic struggle for legal ownership with the tools available to STEM students today, where you can write code, copyright it, and deploy an app to a global market in a single afternoon, it really shows the magnitude of their persistence.
It does. And, as these physical transit systems became safer and more efficient, the country began to connect in unprecedented ways. Once you master moving people and heavy goods, the next massive engineering frontier is figuring out how to move information.
Which brings us to telecommunications.
Exactly. Granville T. Woods, who is often referred to as the Black Edison, is a perfect example of this leap.
He didn't have the luxury of a formal university education?
No, he was largely self-taught. He worked exhausting shifts in machine shops and took evening classes just to understand electrical engineering.
And his breakthrough with the multiplex telegraph in 1887 solved a deadly problem.
A huge problem.
Ugh.
Before Woods, once a train left the station, it was in a complete communication blackout. Station managers had no way to warn a moving train of a hazard on the tracks.
So Woods utilized the principles of electromagnetic induction to engineer a system where messages could be sent between moving trains and stations over a single wire.
He essentially figured out how to transmit data to a rapidly moving target.
He laid the foundational mathematics and engineering concepts for modern wireless communication. But, if we are talking about the Black Edison, we actually have to look at the man who worked directly alongside Thomas Edison.
Oh, Lewis Latimer.
Yes, Lewis Latimer. His contribution to the electrical grid cannot be overstated.
Right, because Edison is globally credited with the incandescent light bulb, but Edison's early prototypes utilized a paper filament inside the glass bulb.
Which, paper and fire.
Exactly. When electrical current passed through it, the paper would burn up almost immediately. It was a great parlor trick, but it was not commercially viable to light a city.
Getting the power to the house was totally useless if the bulb exploded in 10 minutes.
Right. Latimer, who was a brilliant draftsman and an original member of the elite Edison pioneers, understood material science.
So in 1881, he co-patented a revolutionary manufacturing process for carbon filaments.
He engineered a specific method to bake the carbon filaments and attach them within the glass vacuum so they wouldn't oxidize and burn up.
His chemical and mechanical improvements made the light bulb exponentially more durable.
He is the reason widespread electric lighting became a practical, global reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The scale of these breakthroughs is mind-blowing. We've gone from ironing boards to illuminating the globe.
Yeah, the progression is incredible.
But as we shifted into this massive industrial and electrical age, the environmental cost started to become apparent. And this is where the source material gets incredibly relevant for students looking at modern careers in green tech and renewable energy.
Oh, absolutely. Let's examine George Washington Carver and Rufus Stokes.
Let's do it.
George Washington Carver is heavily associated with the peanut, but his actual genius was in agricultural chemistry and environmental restoration.
Because the southern United States had absolutely decimated its soil, right?
Yes, by aggressively overfarming cotton, which strips the earth of nitrogen.
And without nitrogen, nothing grows. You basically face total agricultural collapse.
Carver understood the chemical nitrogen cycle. He pioneered and passionately promoted crop rotation, specifically alternating cotton with legumes like peanuts and soybeans.
Which naturally fix nitrogen back into the depleted soil.
Exactly. And decades later, in 1968, we see Rufus Stokes applying a similar ethos of environmental protection to the air.
Stokes invented a highly efficient exhaust purifier. He utilized mechanical scrubbers to drastically reduce the gas and ash emissions pumping out of industrial incinerators.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the underlying philosophy here is incredible.
Right, Carver and Stokes weren't just solving isolated scientific problems, they were looking at the collateral damage of rapid industrialization.
Carver viewed the environment as a symbiotic system to work with, rather than a resource to endlessly extract from.
And that is a testament to how diverse cultural perspectives drive better innovation.
Definitely. When you approach a complex problem with an inherent respect for sustainability, rooted in different life experiences and cultural values, you don't just build a machine.
You design a holistic system.
Yes, that is the exact creative framework the renewable energy sector relies on today.
But here's the most critical part of this entire deep dive. None of this, not the patents, not the massive businesses, not the leaps in thermodynamics or telecommunications, none of it survives without a system to pass that knowledge down.
No, it doesn't.
These breakthroughs would be isolated, forgotten footnotes if these inventors hadn't actively worked to pull the next generation up with them.
Mentorship was the lifeblood of this ongoing technological revolution. These trailblazers recognized that individual success in a hostile environment was incredibly fragile.
George Washington Carver, with his level of genius, he could have taken highly lucrative consulting jobs in the private sector.
He had offers, yes. But instead, he chose to become the director of agricultural research at the Tuskegee Institute. He dedicated his life to teaching others, ensuring young students had the scientific literacy to elevate themselves.
We saw the exact same impulse with Madam C.J. Walker founding Lelia College to guarantee women had the skills for economic independence.
And Lewis Latimer spent his later years teaching his incredibly precise drafting techniques to young people in his community right up until he passed away.
So what does this all mean? Which brings us to the immediate reality for anyone pursuing STEM today. How do you apply this?
This raises an important question. The modern scientific process is built on failure. Your early prototypes will break. Your code will be riddled with bugs. You will face peer review rejections and funding completely drying up.
Oh yeah, that's just Tuesday in engineering.
Right. Overcoming those technical and academic setbacks does not happen in isolation. Resilience in engineering leads to long-term professional success, and mentorship bridges the gap between a creative idea and a professional reality.
The historical professional networks these inventors build out of pure necessity are the exact models you have to seek out today. If you are navigating a difficult engineering program or a volatile startup environment, finding mentors is just as critical as mastering advanced calculus.
You need to leverage modern equivalents, open source communities, university accelerator programs, industry networks.
You have to bridge the gap between a fragile creative idea and a market-ready reality by relying on the experience of those who have navigated the friction before you.
Let's pull all of this together. We started our journey by looking at the home. We saw how the acute, intimate frustration of ironing a complex sleeve or surviving harsh laundry chemicals catalyzed foundational domestic engineering and massive business empires.
We then tracked how that problem-solving scaled up to tackle the chaotic dangers of the industrial age. We saw mechanical interventions utilizing steam pressure and kinetic energy to automate transit, literally saving thousands of lives in the process.
And we explored the invisible forces that dictate our modern lives. Harnessing electromagnetic induction to send data to moving trains, mastering material science to keep a carbon filament burning bright, and recognizing the chemistry required to protect our soil and our air through sustainable technologies.
And the overarching lesson from all of these sources is profound. Overcoming early barriers, whether that is systemic societal prejudice, a lack of institutional funding, or severe academic struggles, is not a liability.
It's the very crucible that forges elite problem solvers.
Exactly. You do not need a multi-million-dollar frictionless laboratory to begin your career in STEM.
You simply need the critical, unyielding perspective of someone like Sarah Boone or Andrew Jackson Beard. You must look at a broken system, a dangerous process, or a glaring inefficiency, and refuse to accept the status quo.
The ability to identify the friction in a system is the first step of any great engineering feat. And that leads me to the final thought I want to leave you with today. We've talked extensively about how these brilliant minds fought the system to secure their patents. But what about the ones who couldn't? Think about the vast, untapped reservoirs of historical data sitting in global archives. What if the next massive breakthrough in modern engineering isn't a new physical invention at all?
What do you mean?
What if it's an AI algorithm designed to comb through centuries of marginalized historical records, uncovering and digitally rendering the lost or stolen schematics of inventors who were never given credit?
Wow.